I am Jeff Foxworthy, and welcome to Gamekeeper Podcast. If you want to learn more about farming for wildlife and habitat management, then buddy, you are in the right place. Join the Gamekeeper crew direct from Mossy Oak Land Enhancement Studio as they discuss the latest wildlife and habitat management practices, news, and of course, hunting. There's no telling what you'll learn, but I'm going to tell you, I bet it's interesting. Enjoy.
We're live in 3, 2, 1.
Oh, man. It's that time of year.
What key is that in?
Is it in a key? Yeah, you're the musician.
Dudley, what were you saying at our Christmas luncheon?
Ho, ho, ho.
I know that. That's a great
one of my favorite
One of my
movies.
favorite movies.
Fragile.
Fragile. Must be from France.
Yeah.
Italian. Must be Italian.
That's a great movie.
Surprised you guys are still awake after that.
Yeah, well, we are. Yeah. So, well, let me get started.
Yeah.
Welcome, everybody, to our humble podcast studio here in West Point, Mississippi, home of the Gamekeepers. And today we've got noted waterfowl expert.
That's right.
Dr. Brian Davis
In the house.
from Mississippi State.
Oh, Bulldog.
Made the drive over.
Go Dogs!
Y'all are much too kind, but thank you. Happy to be here.
Well, we appreciate you being here. It's a great time of year.
We all love ducks. We love talking about ducks. We love thinking about ducks.
We've been talking about it a lot lately.
We have. And it seems like we're missing some key ingredients to have.
Yeah.
a good
It's waterfowl is the main term. Waterfowl. And we don't have any
Water.
Yeah.
Are you hearing this a lot from people?
Oh, yeah, it's tough. So, I grew up in Missouri, and of course, the secret's out on Missouri and the Central Flyaway states and all that. But my dad and brother are so frustrated right now. I was talking to them the other day, and we've got like 1,200 acres basically to ourselves in Western Missouri. And my dad and brother are basically trying to blow up beaver dams just to get a trickle of water into a panic grass field.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's that dry,
Yeah.
So even the MDC areas, I think, I don't know the proportions, but they do have some water, but some areas it's just hard, and they don't have it. So you've got that much less real estate and that many. What's killer about all this is our enthusiasm is still there. A lot of people want to do it, but then the acres shrink down. It's like all this competition for little space, and it gets frustrating. So
It
That's
seems
true.
like there's more young people duck hunting now
it's
than ever.
unbelievable.
That's got to be putting a lot of pressure in different spots.
I don't know how many kids in my classes, they're like, yeah, Doc, we're going out to, state X, Y, and Z. I'm like, yeah, I used to hunt there when I was a kid before anybody knew about it,
That's
before it was
exactly
any
right.
magazine article. And now it's like, there's really no safe space anymore.
No.
My humble opinion, some would disagree, but it seems like the only sort of really kind of tough place where a duck can get away anymore is like the Playa Lakes, because it's so big, it's so wide open, it's so private, the private land. You got to really work to get permission. But so many other places nowadays, I mean, these kids are just driving to Iowa, driving to Kansas, driving, to X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, good God, man, you guys are crazy.
Yeah, they're mad at them. They really are.
But yeah, I'm hearing like there'll be like the boat parking lots full.
I wasn't there, but the report I got, because I'm too old to fight that battle anymore, but there was almost 60 boats at the little boat ramp north of here that were
And I can remember back in the day, man.
You were the only one out there.
I had a little duck boat when I first moved up here, and there might be one other person.
Yeah,
And that was it.
It's just crazy.
It is.
And in
crazy.
fact, I used to worry that what if I break down? There's nobody
here.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now you'll see plenty of people now.
Yeah.
You love people, wanting to participate in the sport and the money. They're buying duck stamps,
Yeah.
so that's going to the resources.
That's all good.
And I know they're not killing that many ducks.
But everybody can't hunt the same spot.
Yeah, that's right.
It's tough. Yeah.
So, and that kind of makes me wonder, like, does the Corps of Engineers maybe need to have a couple of days during the week or something? That
Well, they've actually shut it down in
rest?
the afternoon, so you can't hunt past what is it, Mac? 12 or 1 on the waterway here. Here locally.
Can you still run your boat and scout and do all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I just don't think you can hunt, and I think this is one of the first years of that.
Yeah.
So they're trying to regulate the pressure a little bit. But I mean, when I see those younger guys, I remember I was that way too. I
Oh,
would
yeah.
get up at 1 and 2 in the morning, go and drive Public Land, and hunt and have a great time. But it's some serious competition out there today.
Yeah, I don't know if y'all have seen it yet. If you haven't, you should. But I went to that Shin Gear Film Festival a
In
month or
Memphis?
so ago, and Brandon Martin produced a video called Under Pressure. I believe he was partnering with Shin and then the Cohen Lab, and it was insane. The amount of hunters, like they would, fly these drones over these areas, and you would see decoy spreads, proven for the most, unless they leave their spread out year round, which not as many people do anymore. But every single spot was getting hunted.
Yeah.
Like even midweek. I mean, the ducks don't really have that many safe areas they can go anymore.
I think we talked about this last time you were on, but we maybe we just talked about it internally. But didn't we talk about how we think it's pushing them to travel at night and feed at night more than anything?
That's some of what I wanted to ask him about today. Are we hurting ourselves?
Oh yeah. No, I mean, the old cliche, ducks don't like to get shot. That's pretty obvious. But, God, what time do you have to be where you need to be?
Yeah, it's pretty depressing, isn't it? Yeah.
So there's all kinds of, matter of fact, I'll admit myself and 2 other people were writing sort of an opinion paper right now about sanctuaries. Like, what do we want sanctuaries to be? Do we have too many already? Big or small? Do we need one big one in the middle of somewhere X, or do we need 3 or 4 small ones and distributed? All these kinds of things. So there's all kind of studies that, all kinds of duck clubs have their own definitions of sanctuary, right? Like some people we know, they're like, you will absolutely not go into that field at any time for any reason, not to check water, not to look for deer, nothing. You don't go there. Other people are like, well, we're done hunting at 9, but then people are running around like scouting deer hunting, or scouting for ducks the next day. And I tell them, I'm like, that's great, not to dissuade you from hunting, but just remember that you riding around on a 4-wheeler, it may not be the exact same as a shotgun blast or a box of shells going off, but it is disturbance, So everybody has kind of their own idea of what it is, what it should be. And there's really no good. There's been some experimental. There was a graduate student, his last name was Dooley, did some really good work about 10, 15 years ago, but basically he had radio marked ducks, and then they deliberately went into places and they did an experiment. Like, if we go in here and shoot once or 5 times, I can't remember all his experimental treatments, but bottom line is, when you harass them a little bit and a little bit more, they'll leave for a day or 2, and some of them come back, some of them don't. So there's all sorts of disturbance, and that's not just a linear thing. Like, hey, if we go into these fields 3 times, the birds are going to do this. It depends on, are you hunting bean fields? Are you hunting 1,000 acre tract of woods? Ducks are going to behave and respond differently to the different habitats. So, I always tell duck club folks, hunters, I'm like, depending on the resource that you're hunting, you guys know we've all been in the woods. I mean, you can shoot at a flock of mallards coming into trees, and 10 minutes later, look under, 100 yards away on top of the water, and birds are swimming around. If we're in a bean field or a rice field or a moist soil impoundment, they ain't going to be sitting there, right? Or they're going to be shovelers sitting out in the middle of flooded beans, and they're not going to come around your decoys anyway. So depends on the species, depends on the type of disturbance, the type of habitat. I know from, I'm starting to go down rabbit holes. I figured I would. I try not to, but
That's good.
my PhD student, Joe Lancaster, with his radio marked mallards, for example, when birds were at Muscadine, when it was being hunted, versus Howard Miller versus Mahana, they acted differently. For example, you think about the bottom of the world down there by Mahana, it's largely, there's a lot of agriculture, of course, but it's a lot of tracts of forest, right? Looks much different from Muscadine, which is reclaimed aquaculture, open, moist soil.
These are all WMAs in Mississippi.
Yes.
In the Delta.
And so, like Joe's radio marked birds, some of them hung out in those woods on the day it was being hunted. They just figure out, hey, if we don't go over there, we're not going to get shot. If we go over there, we're going to get killed. So they figure that out. But even depending on the structure of the habitat that you're in, the birds can really respond. Every mallard and much less every mallard, all mallards are different. There's a lot of individual variation in all these birds. But even just between species, pintails don't like disturbance, man. They'll flush a half mile from me, Mallards, gadwall, they may be able to withstand a little more. So it all depends on the species. Even individuals within a species will behave differently. And then the habitat.
Your daughter's been begging you to hunt since her little brother shot the big 8 last year. You've ran a fire, dissed the fields, got stuck, got unstuck. Planted food plots, fertilized, and prayed for rain. You moved trees, limbed roads, even bought one of those fancy cell cameras.
So what's your excuse?
LS Tractor.
Moultrie was first in feeders since 1979 and is the leader in total game management. They're taking feeding to another level with the new Ranch Series line of durable and versatile feeders, perfect for both wildlife and domestic livestock. So Dudley, you can feed your goats. Whether you're a deer hunter, a hobby farmer, a land manager, or a rancher, Moultrie has you covered with several kit options, including a rotating auger, broadcast, or a gravity kit. And these feeders are 300 or 450 pounds. They're big feeders. All right, so guys, Moultrie is offering our listeners a 15% site-wide discount at moultriefeeders.com. Use code Mossy Oak with a capital M, Mossy Oak, at moultriefeeders.com and get that 15% discount.
I don't know where you started with that, but anyway,
pressure. Pressure. We all talk about it all the time. It's the fourth part of wildlife management: food, water, cover, pressure.
Yeah, and it's an important consideration.
Yeah, no question about it.
And I like to pick on Missouri because I grew up there, and MDC does a fantastic. They're some of the premier wetland managers in the country, and part of the reason is they got the 1.8% sales tax, but they have a heritage of really good hardcore, as do a lot of states, but just hardcore wetland manager, waterfowl biologist. And this is my own Davis hypothesis. This would be a good experiment to do. But my dad and brother have talked about through the years with hunting pressure and the birds just becoming more and more nocturnal, even though where you got some of the best moist soil seasonal wetlands on the planet right up there at that latitude. A lot of birds in the environment, yet they're really nocturnal. And one of my hypotheses is, and a bunch of my biologist friends would probably yell at me, but I wonder sometimes if the habitat is so good, and we know everything's risk reward, right? Deer, turkeys, risk reward. I'm going to go over there. I'm not going over there. You know what happens if you do. Ducks are the same way. And I've told my dad, I said, they do such a great job with habitat. If I'm getting shot at and there's that much food in the water, I ain't coming out there. Why would you go out there in the daytime and risk getting shot? Hell, you come out of there in the evening and go sit down and dark, like he says, man, 4:30, 4:45, it looks like there's 1 million birds in that county, and they all come into those moist soil wetlands. And I don't know if that's really true, but it just seems to me when there's so much food and all you got to do is put your bill in the water, just start doing this.
And on top of that,
you're going to get groceries.
Why would you want to fly further south too?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So, eventually it's, like I tell students, seeds in the environment, whether it's acorns, kernels of corn, whatever, at the start of the season, you have this much, and then every day it's like N-1, right? Seeds continually be depleted until they're gone. So depending on how many seeds are out there, where they are, how many miles there are to feed, that can happen rapidly or it may not happen, it may linger all winter and that many fewer birds come south, So I pick on MDC affectionately. I work for them, and they gave me my start in this field, and they just do such an outstanding job. And not to say, hey, let's just do marginal habitat. That's not my point, but it just makes me wonder. They've weighted the risk. And it's like, hey, there's so much food under the water. All we got to do is go out there and put our bill in the water. We get tons of it in no time. Anyway, that's not fact. I'm just.
It makes sense for our observation for sure.
So then where are they during the day?
Well, they'll sit, they sit in what we call safe space. They'll sit on a lot of WMA lands. And again, think of the private landowners, maybe not this year because everybody's so water stressed. But they'll sit on, sanctuaries on refuges and WMAs, and a lot of private lands. I mean, if you've got enough water, and in areas that you don't hunt at all, or areas that you absolutely are done by 8 or 9 in the morning, there's some areas we call spatial sanctuaries. Like, okay, nobody can go back there for any reason at all. And then from there, it gets a little more loose. And then there's like temporal sanctuaries. So you could hunt a duck club every day, but if you're absolutely out of there by 9 and nobody's scouting deer or riding around on 4-wheelers, really you could argue that the rest of the day is a sanctuary. Now, birds aren't as conditioned and maybe as predictive with that environment as they would be with a national wildlife refuge that hadn't been hunted in 40 years or 50 years, whatever. They know where that is, so they seek out, safe space, and they'll sit on those sanctuaries. Even like in Mahana in those woods on the WMA or on private land, some of those radio marked birds would just sit in there all day. And even though people were hunting around there, but the woods were big enough, it kind of absorbed everybody, So
listening to you talk, I'd like to know just really briefly your background. Did you grow up as a young duck hunter and become fascinated by the birds, and it led to a career in waterfowl management and a PhD? And
so I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, and had my parents not introduced me to waterfowl hunting, I'd probably be a banker or whatever I'd be doing, probably in St. Louis, growing up on the Cardinals and the Blues and all that. And so to this day, one of the most fascinating things I've ever seen in my life is when I was a kid, I hate to reveal my age, but in the mid-'70s, Swan Lake National Wildlife Refuge, they would winter about 200,000 of the EPP Canada geese in that whole region of north central Missouri. So, think of yourself as a little kid and seeing, these 9, 10, 11 pound birds flying around times 200,000. Like, holy smokes. So, and it was cold back then. It seems like much colder then. And I always tell my parents when I go home, I'll be going home next week. I'm like, it seems like all I did is ice skate and play hockey, and the ducks always had a hole in the pond on the side over there. And now you go home and you hardly even see ice, much less be able to skate on it, So times have changed. So it's really, really cold. The geese still came down that far. And to see that many birds, I was just like, oh man, this is unbelievable. So I grew up doing that. And then like in the late 70s, they took us to Florida, and my dad just wanted to hunt scaup in Florida. So we went to Mosquito Lagoon at Cocoa Beach.
Yeah.
Your hands are like welts from the mosquitoes, and then I did that as a kid. I'm like, man, this is wild. One minute I'm in North Missouri, and then down here I'm getting mosquito, so on and on and on. And I went to Mizzou as an undergrad, and I already knew then I wanted to be in the waterfowl field. And of course, the great Dr. Lee Frederickson was there at Missouri. And then I thought I was going to stay and work for MDC, outstanding organization, but went to California, worked for California Waterfowl Association for 6 years.
Oh, yeah.
And then came to Mississippi State in 1994, got my master's and PhD, left in 2001. I did my PhD defense 3 days after 9/11.
Wow.
Huh.
You talk about some philosophical discussions. It was like, do ducks really even matter? Where do ducks rank with people and humans? And, it was wild. But anyway, so then I worked for DU from 2001 to 2009 and came back to Starkville and been here ever since. So I feel like I've been alive 200 years. I tell my students I'm only 125.
Welcome home.
Yeah, no doubt.
So growing up in St. Louis, if I said the word Raccoon Ranch, would you know where I was talking about?
Yeah.
Lanny, it's the most unbelievable place I've ever been.
Where is
I
this?
got to go.
I've never even heard of this.
I got invited by this guy named Arch Hager.
Uh-huh.
And I'd been helping him with his food plots
Hager brothers, yeah.
for a long time. And he was a great guy, just a prince of a fella.
Yep.
And several years, he said, please come go. And one time I found myself, I was going to be driving through St. Louis. And he said, come, let's go duck hunting in the morning. I had no idea what I was getting into. It was the nicest place I'd ever. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's the Budweiser farm or.
Oh, I remember you talking about
Adolphus Bush. Did you meet Adolphus?
No, I didn't.
Okay,
No, I think I pulled up and knocked on the front door, and somebody came to the door and said, "Can I help you?" The delivery entrance is around back. But I ended up getting to stay, and it was just the most incredible place I'd ever been.
Yeah.
And the ducks were just, it was gorgeous.
Yeah, just like a lot of other places in the country, I mean, there's just such a history of hunting right there. Now it's all concrete and millions of people, but historically those river bottoms, it's the confluence of the Missouri and Mississippi. I mean, Lewis and Clark. I mean, the history is amazing there.
That was very close to the city of St. Louis.
That's what I'm saying here.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Now, my dad, he knows all those folks. He grew up, running around those bottoms, and
yeah, they were so nice to me, and I was just really impressed with that property. So
yeah.
Well, let's move on. One of the things that we had wanted to talk to you about is we kind of wanted to do a couple of podcasts with you, and do one on dabbling ducks and then one on diving ducks.
Sure.
And so we wanted to talk about dabbling ducks, and we wanted to learn stuff about these ducks that we don't necessarily know. We think we know a lot of things about them, but every time we have someone of your stature in here, we're always amazed at how much.
No, I'm trying to figure them out myself. So,
So what differentiates a dabbler from a diver?
So a lot of morphological characteristics. So some of the big ones are where their legs are on their body. So talking about dabbling ducks, a lot of them, their legs are closer to the middle of their body because even wood ducks, you think, oh, wood ducks have to hatch. These birds have to hatch over water. Actually, when you think about it from a reproduction standpoint, ducks are precocial, which means they leave the nest the day after they hatch. Waterfowl are precocial. Altricial birds like cardinals, robins, blue jays, the parents come and bring them food until they fledge, and then they can leave the nest, that kind of stuff. And that's a very simplified version of that. But so waterfowl will walk. So dabbling ducks, geese, when they leave the nest, they've got to be able to move. And think about a dry year like this. Especially think about wood ducks or mallards. It's like that grassland habitat or that tree with my favorite cavity, it ain't moving, right? That cavity's still in that tree. Yet last year there was water right underneath here. This year it's dry as a bone. I got to walk a mile away to get to my first water. So most people don't realize that how suited dabbling ducks, geese, birds like that are to walking, because a lot of times they got to move a long way from their nest to their first bit of water, depending on droughts and all that kind of stuff. Diving ducks, typically canvasbacks, redheads, they're nesting right near water or close to it. So the broods are a little bit more mobile when they're young, but adults, they're typically diving. So their legs are typically back further on their body than our dabbling ducks. Matter of fact, the wood duck, the great Frank Belrose figured out that their legs are like the most centered on their body of any North American duck, because you guys probably know this, but I don't know how many people have said, Doc, I'm sitting here turkey hunting in the woods, all of a sudden I'll look up and here's a flock of wood ducks like walking through the forest floor, like eating acorns, Like, yeah, they can be like turkeys, they're really good walkers. So that's one of the big
Remember
ones.
Clay Davis said that those wood ducks, he was sitting in the shooting house one day overlooking some deer radish, and he was looking through his binocs, and he could see wood ducks eating the leaves of the deer radish in the field.
Yeah.
On Tibby Creek.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And then wing loading, a lot of times you'll see diving ducks got to run a little bit first and then take off. So there's several morphological differences in Mother Nature, evolution, whatever term you want to use. What's really cool about all these birds is that, we have 13 dabbling ducks in North America. We've got several diving ducks. But so many of those birds can be accommodated on the same wetland because, one, morphologically, a pintail's neck is that long, a green-winged teal's neck is that long, body sizes are different, foraging. So all those things contribute to like different foraging habitats and food preferences and things like that. So that's what's really cool about really dynamic natural wetland habitats that, usually a wetland's not just this bowl thing and it's real flat. There's like a undulating topography. And all those undulations create different water depths. And then when you think about like your moist soil impoundments or the woods in the summertime, when the water drains down, it exposes those mud flats. Well, some of those that are down in some of those deeper swales, they don't dry out as quickly as those on the top. And we're talking just a couple of inches. When I take my kids out to Noxubee or whatever and say, look, in a wetland, you just need 1 or 2 inches of elevation difference, and the plant communities are totally different, depending on wet and dry cycles and things like that. So all that said, those undulations in those habitats, that creates that biodiversity where birds with short necks and long necks, a swan that can reach down 3 feet under the water and grab food off the bottom, it's feeding there out in the middle of the open, whereas the green-winged teal is up on the shelf where you got just a couple of inches of water So that's what's really cool about all these species is that if you've got a good, diverse wetland, that you can accommodate a lot of different species.
A lot of different niches in one
Exactly.
duck hole.
Yep.
Okay.
No, that's exactly right. Yep.
Nosler's known for their bullets, and now they're making suppressors. Nosler suppressors are made for hunting. Adding a Nosler suppressor to your rifle will make you a quieter, more accurate, and more effective hunter. Protect your hearing and disturb less game with a Nosler suppressor. The time to hunt quiet is now. Learn more at nosler.com.
Hey guys, Dudley from Gamekeepers here. I want to tell you about the all-new Gunner Dog Bowl. It's designed for home and built for travel. It's customizable, leak-resistant, light on weight, solid on durability, and rust-proof. Like other Gunner products, they're made in Nashville and designed for everywhere.
And it seems like dabbling ducks are, it's typically what we have the most of around here. And
Yep.
so, mallards, wood ducks, gadwall, pintails, teal.
Yeah. So some of these, when we think about them like this time of year, we typically, we think about them as migrants. We typically categorize them, and we loosely do this. There's what we call facultative and obligate. So a facultative migrant is a bird like a mallard. It's like they don't really have a real fix. It's not like I'm leaving on November 15th every year. There's differences again in individuals. There's differences in males and females. There's differences in adults and juveniles. But typically facultative birds are those that winter in dynamic environments, like wood ducks and mallards and pintails. It's one of the reasons why pintails are so nomadic is they really can't predict the habitat. Like this year, look how dry it is. Next year we may have wall-to-wall water. An obligate bird is more like a swan or larger ducks that go to more predictable habitats. And in the real world, an example would be like Chesapeake Bay, San Francisco Bay, the Gulf Coast. Historically, and I'm thinking like, anthropogenically before we got here, a lot of those birds would leave the breeding grounds and go to those places, and they would basically stay there. They might make a stop or two, but they were basically going to the Chesapeake Bay or San Francisco Bay or Matagorda Bay, whatever, wherever. Sort of more predictable habitat environments, more submerged aquatic plants, more semi-permanent wetlands. Whereas the dabbling ducks especially, typically more facultative, so their migration schedules aren't as fixed. And then even between the dabblers, it really varies. Actually, you could argue that a blue-winged teal is kind of an obligate species because it does leave so early. There's really not much we're going to do in terms of habitat to like stall the migrations of blue wings. I mean, they're one of the last ones to get to the prairies and one of the last ones to leave, and they jet through. That's why we can hunt them in September.
So they're the last ones to get there, but the first ones to leave.
Yeah, you'll see them hanging out here, right, until, March, April sometimes if there's water and you get those strong south winds and, off they go.
I've always been told they just don't like any change in weather at all or cooler, a little bit cooler temp.
Yeah, so think about the green-winged teal. So, blue wings are, and there's a principle, an ecological principle called Bergman's rule. And basically what that means in a nutshell is that larger animals can live in more northern environments because they're bigger body mass. They can sustain cold, right?
We've discussed this with deer, whitetail.
So a Florida key deer is not going to live in Saskatchewan, right? So even though what's fascinating about these birds, and there's a really popular one we like to hunt. Here's part of a trivia question. It's a goose, totally defies Bergman's rule. What is it? Greater white-fronted goose.
Specs.
Think how big the specs are and hardy they are, and yet they're down here and way before it gets really cold, right? So they sort of defy Bergman's rule. So even little green-winged teal, there's green-winged teal that will migrate later than specs do, in their minutia compared to specs, So the rules don't always add up or hold up for every species, but by and large, it's fairly true. But mallards they're, I kind of refer to them as sort of the hogs, the white-tailed deer. They're the pigs of the waterfowl world. They eat almost everything. They're big so they can withstand the cold. They've adapted well to agriculture like the geese have, better than a lot of other species. So they're pigs, right? And again, there's a lot of individual variation. And in photo period, when it starts getting darker early in the fall, that's a big cue for migration in a lot of birds. Weather, but even with mallards, what we've learned through the years is that it really takes quite a bit of snow, quite a bit of cold wind, quite a bit of below 32-degree temperatures to really move lots of mallards. So some of those birds, and what's fascinating about them, you guys have seen some here early in the fall. We call them Halloween ducks. It's like, why are you here in Mississippi? It's not even cold yet in Canada, right? People are still dry field hunting up in Canada, and there's mallards in Mississippi. So, and then there's some that come late, like in January, or don't come at all, just within mallards. Then you have all the other species, and so they all have these different migration schedules. And the other big factor that relates to is their food and what sort of habitat specialists are they. For example, think about gadwalls, shovelers, widgeon. Widgeon and gadwall are vegetarians of the duck world. They'll eat seeds, of course, but they're more vegetarian than most. And even those two are really different in what they do in winter. And then shovelers, they're like the carnivores. They eat a lot of bugs. So the birds that are really dependent on more wetland aquatic habitats like gadwall and shoveler and blue wings, they're going to move when it freezes. If it doesn't, they can withstand the cold and hang out further north, but not as much as like a mallard or maybe a pintail that's really well adapted to grain fields. Unless you get a bunch of snow up north, mallards are going to sit on those reservoirs at night or the daytime and go dry field feed and come back. So it really takes these cold waves, really. And in some Aaron Pierce's work, when he was a PhD student here, he did these aerial surveys for 3 years. And we're looking at those again now. We have 20 years of data, and there's going to be some amazing things here, I think. One, because you got 20 years of data on an animal or animals, you can start looking at like habitat changes, like crop distribution in the Mississippi Delta, water. What has hydrology done in the last 20 years in the Mississippi Delta? So we're going to get into all that. But Aaron found that wrap your mind around this, if I remember this correctly, for every 1 degree less in temperature, there was at the latitude of St. Louis, like St. Louis and Bowling Green, Kentucky, Louisville, Kentucky, whatever that latitude was, for every 1 degree decrease in temperature, there's an additional 12,000 mallards in the Mississippi Delta. For every 1% increase in snowfall in northern latitudes, there's like 1,400 more mallards in the Mississippi Delta. And so like Aaron said, it's not just one cold spell, like you guys hear the snow geese now. Snow geese didn't fly over Starkville 30 years ago. It's kind of a new thing, but you get those initial cold pushes in the fall and boom, you can hear the snow geese flying overhead. So they're moving, but it doesn't mean all of them are moving, right? It's just, we need these incremental weather, pushes, like cold temperature. It needs to stay below zero for a while. like a week, really. You really start to see a mass movement of mallards when it's below freezing for about a week. And for every inch of snowfall to the north, they can't, they run out of food at some point. But it just doesn't do that much anymore, right? Mm-mm. It might get cold for a few days, like bitter cold, and then it seems like mid next week it's 60 again, I mean, I talked to my parents, and my dad's like, my God, we're out here in, just a shirt, and it's almost Christmas in central Missouri, and it's like, it's just so different, So those birds, especially if they have grain, they're adapted to grain, like a lot of the dabbling ducks are, and there's no snowfall. Some are going to move. They just have an inclination. I anthropomorphize it. Think about people. There's some people that can't travel the world enough, right? Like they got to see Italy 10 times before they die. There's other people that don't want to leave their recliner, And in the waterfowl world, there are some, some mallards are just pigs. They don't move. And when they get down here, they don't move a lot. And then there's other birds like pintails that are just constantly on the move looking for the new 2 to 4 inches of shallow water somewhere, kind of really nomadic. And then there's variations within those species. So anyway, not to diverge too far, but
yeah, that's really interesting. What would you, if you lined up some food from acorns to corn to soybeans, all the different kind of grains available? What if that duck can make up his mind and go to what he wants? What are the top 2 or 3 going to be?
Well, you got to think about that in terms of, so you want me to just say corn, flood corn, everybody
No, really. I'm hoping you'll say, I was expecting you to say acorns maybe. Right?
So usually it depends. Yeah, no, acorns are really important. So one thing I always tell people, especially if there's time to like talk to people about things, I'm like, think back just 400 or 500 years ago. So
there was no grain.
Right. Before we got here.
The landscape has changed so much.
So what did ducks eat? You just name one. Give me some other ones. Acorns. What else?
Insects. Invertebrates.
Yep. What else?
Got to be native grasses.
Yeah. Seeds.
Yeah.
Think about our world before we got here. Think about the northern prairies. There was a lot of dry upland areas, of course, where they nested, but all along the river systems, we didn't have big levees. So water might come up really slow and fan way out, shallow water. And then when it came back, it would grow all these grasses and weed seeds, I mean, and I tell people, I'm like, especially people that are new at this, I'm like, just drive the Mississippi Delta in the peak of farming season. And most of those weeds that are growing in that ditch, that's what ducks ate 10,000 years ago when they got here after the last Wisconsin glaciation. Mm-hmm. Those are the things that really matter, Yes, the grains are important. They provide a lot of high energy. So the first way you want to think about this is a balanced diet like us. Like I tell the students, I'm like, you remember the guy in the McDonald's commercial who tried to live there for like 30 days and his health just, So you have to have a balanced diet. And historically, that's what our natural wetlands gave the birds, protein like in seeds, invertebrates, calcium like the hard shell critters like snails. Weed seeds are high in energy. So a moist soil, and I hope landowners listen to this because yes, I grew up in corn country and I'm not those of you know I'm not an arrogant person, but I've shot more 4 duck limits of mallards and flooded corn than I can ever remember. But I can also tell you there were a lot of days in Missouri, I'm like, I wish I could shoot 6 ducks. You don't see another duck. It's like mallards. There's no teal, no pintail. Again, that's no one's fault, but when you get in this real high agrarian seed environment, and water depths can really, and we'll talk about that in a minute, they can really influence things like green-winged teal. Those seeds, the moist soil seeds they have about 70% of the amount of energy that a rice or a corn seed has. So granted, panic grass seeds, for those of you that are not watching the video, there's barely a space between my fingers, tiny seeds. So you have to eat a lot of those to equate to 1 kernel of corn. I get that. But the seed value, even in those tiny seeds, is about 70% of what corn and rice is. So I often tell landowners, I'm like, if you're good at growing corn, you want to do it and you have a lot of acres, go for it. That's great. It works. I've shot a lot of ducks in corn and dirty corn, blah, blah, blah. But a lot of times growers don't have really good luck with it, you know. And I don't know how many phone calls I've gotten through the years like, Brian, you were right, man. My corn crop went to heck, you know, and we got all these weeds, these wetland weeds. They go, well, we have more ducks we've ever had. You know, we've had the best duck season ever. I'm like, I told you, you know. So
You're a hero.
So hot crops they're awesome. They're wonderful. If you have enough acres, and I don't know what that magic, you know, a lot of times if people say, well, I got like 50 acres I can flood, I'm like, don't try to plant corn. Grow weeds, grow moist soil, grow millet, annual smartweed, whatever you can do, figure that out. If you got 10,000 acres, yeah, plant several hundred acres of corn. You know, it's all relevant to scale and things like that. But so the corn, rice, very high in carbohydrates. So if you're getting ready to run a marathon, you're not going to eat radishes. You're going to eat baked potatoes, you know, sweet potatoes, right? Whatever. So those high energy grain seeds provide a lot of carbohydrates. They provide other things, but it's the inverts, the green browse, duckweed. Gadwall love to eat duckweed. It's one of the big drivers of them being in parts of Delta National Forest, areas with duckweed, real high in protein. So depending on the species and the time of the year. So let me say this too. So, you know, mallard, we all know the mallards get the green head in the fall. So they've got to eat while they're migrating, they need energy to fly. So they've got to eat grain and weed seeds and things like that. But a feather is about 85% protein. So those mallards, to grow the green head and the females to get into that alternate plumage in the fall, they're gorging on inverts. I mean, not for long periods, but they're eating a lot of inverts to get that protein. Late winter, how many times have you guys seen this? You shoot a hen mallard late winter, or see hen mallards late winter. Some of them almost look like model ducks. They're dark. Mm-hmm. They're going through that pre-basic molt. So again, in late winter, they're gorging the females. You'll see the males with their head up, you know, and the females just gorging on insects and invertebrates to get that protein and that calcium to get ready for pre-breeding. And that nobody knows the real story on the pre-basic plumage. It must have some insulating capacities or benefits once she gets back to the prairies. But they go through that real heavy, dark molt late in the winter. So that's kind of bug driven, or plants with, you know, high amounts of protein. So depending on where they're at in their biological part of the year, it depends. But you know, when it's cold, I mean, we kind of laugh. You're not going to carry wintering duck populations on insects because there's just not enough calories, right? It's like big boy needs to eat, right? You're not gonna sustain an offensive line on salad. I mean, they need to eat some of it, but they got to eat, right? So ducks are a lot the same way, especially big birds like mallards that need a lot of calories. So the invertebrates those amino acids are important in their diet for various nutritional reasons, but the big boys got to eat, you know, so the grain and the weed seeds and things like that are really important. Yeah.
Can you see the invertebrates with your naked eye?
Oh yeah. When you guys are out in the marsh, just like, you know, spiders running across the top of.
Yeah. So I see that they look like maybe like larvae for a mosquito, and they're just kind of.
Well, those are like midge chironomids. So you guys ever see the big balloons, like it looks like clouds, like twisty clouds? You're like, oh, look at all those mosquitoes. Those are actually midges. Probably the greatest midge clouds I've ever seen were in the Sacramento Valley of California. Just amazing. That Mediterranean climate, real mild climate. But those midges, so when they're those worms, those chironomid worms, I know we're not talking about divers, but like scaup and some of the diving ducks, man, they'll just nail those things. So yeah, so dabbling ducks eat a lot of that. Yep.
Is there things that a guy can do to try to have invertebrates?
Well, typically natural wetland environments, and people ask me like, what's your favorite ag food for ducks? I'm like, well, you know, in a short-term weekend hunt, give me some flooded corn, like flooded up to my knees maybe, and probably be pretty good. But long-term, I would say rice fields. And the reason I say rice fields is because they're just such an important aquatic habitat, and rice is a grass. And so typically grasslands, whether they're wet or dry, have a lot of either like upland arthropods, you know, invertebrate insects, or wet areas like moist soil impoundments, wet prairies, things like that. There's lots of different kind of invertebrates. So rice is, because it's a grass, it's like the closest thing, it's closest hot food we have to like moist soil, if you will. if you let your imagination go. So rice is a really, really important agricultural habitat on the landscape. And not to say the other crops aren't important, they are. But so basically those natural wetland habitats. And then, like I always tell my students, I'm like, what's really productive about bottom on hardwood forest? What happens in the fall? And it takes them a minute, but like they drop their leaves. I'm like, yep. Walk through the woods late in the winter after they've been flooded, all winter long. What do you see? Like, oh, a bunch of black mucky stuff. I'm like, yeah, that's all. And that's all the work of water and all kind of chemical processes, basically lack of oxygen because they've been under the water. And those invertebrates feed, we call it like the bottom up drivers, And so like your woods, and that's why I would tell landowners at the end of duck season, don't pull your boards right away. Pull your boards down to, 2 to 12 inches of water so those birds can get in there. And a lot of that leaf litter, you'll see a lot of snails. And those mallard hens will get in there late winter and wood ducks, and they'll just gorge on those snails, And the reason that all happens is all that detritus, the leaf litter, all that mass under the water. It's just kind of decomposing. And so that's what builds, like soil, and it basically produces life, from the bottom up, literally. So there can be a lot of bugs in bottom on hardwoods, but typically these grassy, moist soil type wetlands where you have all this diverse grasses, sedges, stuff like that, you get a smorgasbord of bugs. So
what are some of your favorite moist soil plant species for dabblers?
I always like getting in an argument with Dr. Kaminsky about this.
I was going to say, because I had him for summer camp.
Oh yeah,
and
yeah.
He was like, smartweed isn't as important as they've said it was for years.
No. And from a nutritional standpoint, he's right. Barnyard grass is pretty hard to beat. Wild millet. But I grew up again in kind of north central Missouri, hunting like the Grand River bottoms and that. And for whatever reason, that part of the world just cranks out this annual smartweed. You got to be careful. I don't like the perennial smartweed at all. And that grows a lot down here in real wet areas. But on a little bit higher parts of the wetland that dry out earlier in spring, man, I've pounded annual smartweed fields day after day and couldn't shoot the ducks out of them.
Does it have a little pink?
Yeah, big pink flower. There's Pennsylvanicum, Lepathifolium. There's several different types, and then the one that grows in the real wet areas, it's called Polygonum hydropeperoides, but it's marsh smartweed. But the seed's real hard.
They're white, aren't they?
Yeah, more of a white flower, and they can really take over and outcompete a lot of stuff.
Yeah,
and usually that's kind of a signature that you're a little too wet. You may want to dry out, but yeah, those. So, and like Jody Pagan, Jody gets my vibe at Five Oaks. You guys know Jody. He's like, yeah, Davis. He goes, those greenheads don't even leave that smartweed. They got a huge, like smartweed millet wetland behind the lodge out there that they don't hunt. He goes, Davis, but you can walk across their back and they never get out of there. I mean, so I think it's not just the seed, but if you think about a lot of these wetland plants also are good cover crops, and depending on their height and water depths and things like that. But smartweed, I kind of joke, it's like a herbaceous forest. You don't think there's birds in there till you start walking towards it, and it's like, holy cow, that thing's just full of ducks,
And it may help with, like you were saying, with
like
thermoregulation and stuff. It's also housing a bunch of invertebrates.
And there's a bunch of invertebrate. The leaves on those are kind of desiccate, which means the bugs, they can start on them and kind of wear them out and wear them down and all that stuff, just all this life going on in there. And then that's food for the birds, So like teal, they get harassed a lot by marsh hawks, northern harriers. So they'll get in that as cover, and it cuts the wind down. So a lot of these, it's like I tell my students, it's migration and winter waterfowl management. It's all about the food, but it's not all about the food. Or I should say it's not all about the food, but it's all about, however you want to phrase that. But food is really, really important. But these wetland plant communities give you so many other things. It could be, breaking the wind, thermal regulation, hiding, teal hiding from northern harrier, stuff like that, or owls or whatever. So, yeah.
And that's similar to like when somebody calls me, it's just kind of an analogy, but, they talk about persimmons being dioecious. And, used to, we would say, just kill most of the male trees once they
Yeah.
show their sex. And now we just like to leave them there because they attract so many insects,
Yeah.
which birds use. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, it's not always the plant species. It's not all about the food. It's
Yeah.
what else
Yeah.
they provide, like
Yeah.
cover or
And-
attracting insects, things like
And thinking about talking about moist soil again too, not all of them. So the energy value in a lot of those is pretty high. They're all pretty good from an energetic standpoint, but you're not going to carry tons of mallards forever on plants like panic grass or sprangletop because the seeds are so small, right? So larger seeds like millet, you know, smart weeds, those that they're a little bit bigger, a little bit more energy. The lamellae and the mallard's bill is a little further space. So little birds like teal, they're really good at those small seeds, you know. And that's another thing I'll say about habitat. And green wings are real sensitive, at least in my opinion. You can have areas that are just awesome moist soil, but if your water is up to your thigh or even your knees, sometimes you're not going to see many. You know, I love to hunt green wings. I love to grill green wing teal to tailgates. I mean, everybody's like, "Doc, these are good. What are these?" I'm like, "Green wing teal. You know, they eat seeds. They taste great." But you can have awesome habitat, awesome vegetation, but if your water levels are too high, and I've seen this in more places than one, you know, and then the water goes down about the top of your knee boot, you know, shin deep. It's like, ooh, all of a sudden there's teal, or even ankle deep water. There's some duck clubs in the Mississippi Delta I won't mention, and they got into WRP, and it was designed well. And they have these fields that are just prolific, like panic grass fields and sprangletop. And water's like this. And man, it's just
6-8 inches.
teal, just, you know. And they purposely do that. They know they're not going to go shoot a limit of mallards in there. They're going to go shoot teal. And hey, you know, but if you raise that water another 4 or 5 inches, they're probably, not to say they won't be there, but birds like teal, you know, so that's the other thing I impress on landowners is, besides the quality plants in your environment, make sure your water levels are, you know, I mean, we've all hunted waist deep water and shot mallards in the woods. I mean, I realize that, but when those birds are trying to feed on those small seeds, you really want to give them an opportunity to get at it.
So
That makes sense.
when you're talking about dabbling ducks, then you're looking at the size of that duck, and
That's right.
basically that duck, when he tips up to feed, his butt's staying up above the water level.
Yep.
And it's that only as far down as his neck will stretch.
That's right. And so for mallards, we say the golden rule is like 18 inches. That's, you know, when the bird's up in the air. And if you get out and really watch birds, you know, if you see them really scramble, like really kicking their feet, you know, what that's telling me is like they're trying to really reach, but it's just a little too deep, you know. So bringing it down just a few inches, a lot of times you'll see them and they're not scrambling as much. It's like they can stay, you know, they can reach it. And to put all this in numbers, the great Dr. Heath Hagee, who's was one of Kaminsky's PhD students, he did some experiments with feeding waterfowl over a cold water refuge, places that weren't being hunted, and they kept adding millet and did a bunch of cool stuff to see when birds would kind of give up on foraging. But the bottom line is, after 3 winter seasons and Heath watching literally thousands of ducks, not just mallards, I think the number is 90% of all those birds that he watched fed in 6 inches of water or less. And you can do that over there. You know, refuges have an easier, or let's just say anybody where the hunting pressure is not as much of a focal point, or people tend to walk out to hunt, not have a boat. You can generally keep the water levels shallower, you know, and that's just so advantageous to small birds like teal. Pintails, I mean, there's a plant that basically drives pintail existence in California, swamp timothy. Those guys they'll just put a ring of water on that swamp timothy, and those ducks will just walk that water line, just, you know. With their
So
bill.
what is that?
It's a little bitty tiny grass with these seeds that you almost have to see under a microscope, and it'll be a carpet of it. We have stuff here called teal grass, you know, like love grass. It grows kind of low. You may have seen that, real small seeds, but it's just one of those annual high seed producers, tiny seed. But boy, they love them, and they can get them. The lamellae, you know, close enough in their bill, they can just, the water goes out, and so they can make a living on. They can't live all winter on those, but it's really an important food item for green-winged teal, pintails. But it's fascinating. People think ducks need a lot of water, but really if they're not being disturbed, they'll walk on dry ground. They'll be sitting up on logs. I mean, ducks, when they're not disturbed, they spend half the day out of water. They're sitting on rice levees or in logs in the woods, all kind of stuff. But typically we're not able to see that because we're running around and disturbing them.
The Ferminator is the industry's most versatile piece of food plot equipment, allowing plotters to do every step of the process, working the soil, adding seed and soil supplements, and compacting, from start to finish with a single implement. It's hassle-free by design. Set it for the seed size and simply drive the tractor, and the Ferminator does the rest. Check it out at theferminator.com.
You're talking about disturbing them, and it made me think about, I wanted to ask you about what you've thought about drones. And people using drones to maybe scout or instead of that human intrusion of going into an area. It's a big question, and there's a lot of different angles on it. But just your kind of thoughts off the top.
Yes, I don't have a lot of experience with them right now. I know Kevin Ringelman and one of his students at LSU are working on counting some of those birds, some of the mallards in the woods, different woods, with drones, and I wish he was here to tell you that. Typically with a lot of wildlife, depending on what they are, it's like a certain height. If you're below that, they get spooked. If you're above that, they'll be pretty good with it. So it's kind of a trade-off between, how precise do we need to identify that species? So how low do we need to go, and does it work? So honestly, I think in some places I've heard people tell me, they don't flush, and other times they do, but you don't really know how high exactly you are. But height definitely will influence. Some critters can handle it better than others, but I haven't used them a lot. So some of the duck hunters that do could probably give you a much better answer. So
what would be your thought? A lot of our listeners have been doing this kind of stuff for years, and we're almost talking under their heads, but a lot of us, including myself, don't know a whole lot about waterfowl management. How would somebody, just say they, own 50 or 60 acres and don't have a waterfowl spot on their property, how would somebody get started? And then are there any kind of like regulations as far as, plugging up a ditch or something like that?
No, that's a good question. And I think this year everybody's looking for that silver lining. It's like how, typically like we call them camelbacks or chrysophylle pumps, that go over a levee and hook onto a PTO of a tractor, and they put them in a river or some water body and pump water. Even a lot of those places this year are challenged, So, typically it depends on the water course. Typically the larger the water courses and the more, like in the agricultural environment where there's water going from farmer X, Y, and Z, you got to be careful about who, where you're moving water, the certain volumes of water and what time of year and things like that. But yeah, so you can do simple things like, sandbag an area and keep water from running out, and there's various kinds of water control structures. Probably the more popular ones are what we call stop log structures. And they have what we call like a riser on them. And you basically put these boards down in front of a pipe where water comes in and it flows underneath a levee and goes into the wetland of, your desired choice. Probably one of the least expensive ways to move water to create duck habitat is gravity feed. So areas if you got an area with water like a reservoir and you have potential duck habitat below that, and you can move water from up here to down here, that's really cheap. You don't need diesel pumps, you don't need wells. Of course, you need water up in that reservoir to do that. But then you need a conveyance system, some sort of pipe. It may be a screw gate where you turn the handle, and the water comes up and goes out. And
That would be really cool. You know, a lot of us like to catch big bass, and you do a winter drawdown oftentimes when you're you know, trying to get the big bass to eat all the little brim. And so you could kill two birds with one stone. You could have a little bitty impoundment below your pond dam. And
and so and people should realize too, there's the NRCS provides a lot of great services. There's an NRCS biologist in every county. So if you think you have, you know, a potential wetland, Fish and Wildlife Service also has what they call Partners for Fish and Wildlife programs, and they'll come in and NRCS actually has engineers. They'll come in and they'll shoot like elevations on your place, even if it can be really small. I don't know if they have like a minimum acres, but they'll do small and big places. So they'll come in and you might have a soil scientist. They may take some soil cores to say, hey, this will hold water or won't. And then they may even shoot elevations for you and design like a small levee or even install a water control structure. So there are some opportunities with some of the agencies, and for some of the smaller landowners that may not have as many resources, you know, like start with the NRCS, just asking those questions could be really helpful.
Okay. And I guess you could ask your state person as well.
Oh yeah.
Or maybe call your conservation organization like DU or Delta Waterfowl. They may have somebody that
and when I'm embarrassed to say I don't know what the private lands program is for DU, but when I worked for them in the mid 2000s, we had what we call Partners for Wildlife. And man, we would give high-end water control structures to landowners. You know, part of it was to save, you know, like there were 319 grants that was for highly imperiled streams like soil erosion. So we would give them that for, you know, to kind of curtail soil erosion, but at the same time, you could provide really good duck habitat. So I don't think they give pipes anymore, but that was a real successful program. But NRCS, there's a lot of conservation programs, CP programs, conservation program, and there's various numbers associated with them based on what they'll do. But a lot of smaller landowners may be able to find some assistance from that. Yeah, that's where I would start. NRCS, state or federal biologist, and or Ducks Unlimited.
I mean, it would be so fun to have a little hole on your place, not to mention the recreational value is going to skyrocket if you've got a little waterfowl spot. You know, you got deer, you got turkey. Oh, we got ducks too. You know,
this is duck land by the square foot. Not the acres.
This is an interesting year, and I have it's kind of another Davis theory, and my friends will probably tell me I'm crazy, but it can be. Duck hunting can go south, no pun intended. It can go bad, in my opinion, when you've got like landscape water and it's warm. I don't know if you guys remember, God, time flies now. 4 or 5 winters ago, it was warm and we had water from one place. It was just water. You could boat almost anywhere. And I got invited over to Arkansas and Bayou LaGrue, you know, one of the historic Bayou LaGrue mallard woods over there. And the guys that had me were great people. They just kept apologizing to me. I'm like, don't apologize. I understand. I mean, it's like 60 degrees, water everywhere. You see a pair of mallards here, a pair of mallards there. And he's just like, man, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm like, look, ain't nothing any of us can do about that. You know, for the ducks, it's wonderful. They're not stressed from the cold. There's water everywhere. It's wonderful for them. For us, it's horrible. Go to this year. It's so dry, you know, and automatically you're like, man, if I got habitat, we're going to smoke them, right? We're going to get them. And I've already talked to some managers of a couple of prominent duck clubs. I won't mention their name. Great folks, you know, all that, just to kind of maintain their privacy. I'm like, you must just be stacked. Like, well, we got huntable numbers, but it's not like what you would think. And their habitat is 5-star. I mean, it's, you know, it's amazing. And yet they're like, yeah, we're not as loaded as you might think, you know? And so I think there's like this water interface. And now with this 20 years of aerial survey, we can do a podcast. Hopefully this summer, this stuff ought to be done. But I think there's like a happy medium, like where if it's too wet, we're done. You might as well just watch football and hang out, right? And if it's too dry, a lot of people are limited unless you have a place to go, right? But in terms of the ducks, I think there's some threshold somewhere where even if you have like wanting to flood the back 40 or whatever, it's not, even in a dry year, I don't know if it's going to guarantee you a lot of birds, because when you have so many small patches of water out there, it just can't, somewhere at some point, it can only sustain so many birds, right? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. It's like if it's so dry, yeah, you're going to have patches of rich habitat and probably some birds, but at a greater landscape level, and especially where you have birds moving around looking for food and going back and forth, and you know what ducks do, that can't happen, right? Because there's just not the resources. So really wet years, I think, for duck hunters are not good. And years like this, some people are going to have spectacular years this year, but a lot of people are going to be like, it's just too dry, right? And even where there is water, you may not have the number of birds there that you might if there was like maybe another 30% water in the landscape, if that makes sense. Because it just, you try to get so many birds packed into one place, they just can't sustain for very long. They just got to move and go find other stuff. So this is a really weird year. I mean, it's very dry and very restricted.
I'm interested to see how the drought may affect next year.
Yeah, we were talking about that last
trees
week.
Dying, or stuff growing in areas where it hadn't grown in years, that kind of thing.
It's a great question and a great observation. I have two young ladies, two of my master students, and we're doing a big like WRE evaluation. NRCS provided us some funding, and it's not just us. There's a similar study in South Dakota, Missouri, Mississippi, and then East Texas and North Louisiana. And I've been out in the field a lot with them this summer and fall, and man, it's just so dry. And I've told them this is a duck hunter's worst nightmare, but I said ecologically for the trees, this is the cream of the crop. Their feet are dry, they're not being flooded. People don't realize how much pressure our hardwood forests are in,
especially those small acorn reds.
I think exactly. Water oak, willow oak, nuttall oak, cherry barks, which we don't have a lot of, and then where I'm from, the nuttall oak is basically called the pin oak, but ecologically they're basically the same tree. But just, I think I'm fair to say this, like Arkansas Game and Fish, for example, they're investing like $100 million in reviving the bottom and hardwood forests because they've just been flooded for so long. So
they convert to overcup.
Go to overcup. Yep. So many times, been with so many landowners like, man, we've been shooting ducks here since the 30s, and now they don't come in here, and you're walking around and you see these like mini baseballs floating around on the water. And I'm like, look at your woods, and that's what I tell people is like, if you got a smart weed millet field and you go diss that thing down, it looks completely different. Right. But woods, as long as the trees are still standing, unless you're a forester, they don't look any different, right? But all through the decades, the species composition has shifted to more overcup in a lot of places. So people just haven't realized that, and they've gotten more educated. But there's a huge push, especially in Arkansas, to really restore the hydrology. We can kill trees by flooding them too early for too long, and we can kill them by leaving the water on too long in the spring. And so they're investing literally $100 million, tens and tens of millions of dollars. Biomeat is getting a major facelift. So in a year like this, it's really frustrating to the tree lovers, right? The duck hunters, everybody wants to hunt in the woods. But for the trees, for the long-term health of the trees, this is a really, really good thing. And I use the same analogy in the prairies. Those prairie wetlands need to dry out. It's just part of their natural ecological process. The soils need to dry out. It's like things just need to like dry out, recycle, nutrients need to recycle. It's like a wetland needs to breathe, right? But as duck hunters, we're like, we want everything to be flooded max every year. All the wetlands should be chock full of water and blah, blah, blah. And so that, water produces ducks, yes, but for the long-term health of a lot of these ecosystems, they've got to cycle, So in a year like this, it's really, really frustrating for us as duck hunters. But in terms of tree health, it's the best thing that could happen. So
that's really interesting to think about.
Yeah, we've talked about it a lot.
That it cycles, and Yeah, we all were selfish. We're wanting everything to be perfect, so we
Yeah.
can kill our limited ducks. And
I had the privilege of going to Brandywine Island this summer to look at that, and the caretaker's like, I'm gonna take you down in this slough, this buttonbush break, man. It's never not had water. And he said, not only is it dry this year, he goes, I think I can drive across it. We were down in anybody that's seen Brandywine, there's a lot of ridge and swell, a lot of topography. And there were places we'd be going downhill and it's just cypress knees and buttonbush. And, Red Root Flat says ain't a puddle of water until the Mississippi River. And not only was it not flooded, he was driving like right through this thing. He's like, I've never seen this. So it's a really extraordinarily dry year. And so, but for the resource, I know duck hunters hate me saying that, but for the resource, it's really wonderful. For us as hunters, it's really disappointing. It's kind of a double-edged sword. So
just double down next year.
that's right.
These dabbling ducks, have you got a couple that's come to mind as your favorite?
I actually gave my students that last week on 3-point extra credit question on the final exam.
Yeah.
What's Doc's favorite waterfowl species? And there was no wrong answer, but some of them like mallard, wood duck with question marks, like, oh, I can't remember. I'm like, it's all good. So I tell them it depends on what mood I'm in, I guess, but I don't know. The elegance of northern pintails. I mean,
everybody loves
to watch pintails just fly and the courtship flights, to me, I mean, I'll sit there and watch them like I don't even want to shoot at them. They're just so pretty to watch, and they're so good to eat. Green wings from a table fare, little seed eaters, boom, boom on the grill, 5 minutes, you're done, medium rare, but all of them, mallards, wood ducks. I mean, wood ducks are technically a tree duck, but I call them dabblers. But, I'm not a trophy hunter. I don't have any mounts in my house. I'm not like a mountain guy, so to speak. I love to hunt them and cook them for people. I cook a lot of white fronts, not a duck, of course, but man, oh man, they're fun to hunt and they're so good to eat. They're just fabulous.
Those curly tails on the back end of a mallard.
Yeah.
Usually there's 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Do they serve any purpose or just make them look handsome?
So, yeah, and there's some truth to that. And we could probably do a whole session on, there's something called a carotenoid, and carotenoids are like signals of our health, for example. And so plumages in ducks are, like mallards, they pair, like most of the mallards right now are paired. There's not a cardinal or a robin or a blue jay out there that's paired. It won't be until March, April, or May, right? But most of the mallards right now that we see around here, actually, they may still be in flocks, but they're paired. So
did you know that, Lanny?
Uh-uh.
How did
totally different. So pintails aren't quite as paired. Blue wings wait until late in the winter. They're not paired yet, but mallards, a lot of them are paired. So a lot of those plumage characteristics. So based on what a mallard can eat, so the hen is sizing up the male, right? And in wild duck populations, it's not this hard and fast and this linear, but typically there's about 51% males to 49% females, roughly, give and take. And so what that means is there's a few more males in the population than there are females. So if you're a male and you're going to pair, a female is going to select you, you're going to want to grow that gaudy plumage, right? You want to get that green head as fast as you can. You want to be able to grow really colorful speculums. And so a lot of your diet will reflect a lot, like how fast you can complete the molt process. And then if you're good at exploiting different environments and you're big and you got showy feathers, you got a bright green head, you got those curly cues, those were all what we call like secondary sex characteristics that the female's looking at the male going, oh, he works, he doesn't, whatever. Mm-hmm. So yeah, all those little plumage details, a lot of that is food driven, but it plays into the life history and it factors into when they do courtship and when they pair and maintain pair bonds and all that. And it's kind of like, this time of year, they feed a lot on the same things kind of at the same rate, if you will. But as winter goes to spring, you'll see a lot more vigilance in the male mallards. The hen will have her head under the water. I mean, he has to eat, of course, but that hen, man, she's just gorging, just got her head under the water and he's like this, watching over her. So that's one of one of the adaptive survival mechanisms of a lot of dabbling ducks is they pair so early in the year, especially mallards, So a lot of people are like, how come we can't hunt late? It's getting warmer. We should hunt in February. And I'm like, if you really watch ducks when you're hunting in late January, it's over, right? I mean, we may have a big cold push and we get some new birds, but man, they're tired. You see a pair here and a pair there. I mean, even when I hunt late in the year, I may just have one mallard hen on a jerk string. It might be all I use, I mean, I'm not throwing out 75 decoys because biologically they've changed, they're just off doing their own thing. They're in small groups, gradually in pairs, things like that. So kind of a long response to your question, but all those plumage characteristics, and that's the other thing too, when you're out hunting this year, so oftentimes people that haven't watched ducks all, like pintails or gadwall, they do a lot of aerial courtship. So I don't know how many times I've hunted and you'll see a pintail courtship flight. Like, oh, here comes a flock of sprig, get ready. I'm like, no, yeah, that's a flock of sprig, but that's like 8 drakes and 1 female, and those guys are courting her, So a lot of those birds are showing off their courtship ability in the fall. Pintails, widgeon, you'll see a lot of those. Mallards do it, gadwall do it, not to the extent that pintail and widgeon do. But what those males are doing is they're flashing their speculums, they're flying, they're showing her that, they're adroit at flying, they got stamina, and that's part of their life history. Like pintails, for example, are just really nomadic, and they have to fly a long way. And so that female is kind of checking him out. So all those plumage, I'm looking at the sprig on your wall, the long tail, I mean, those act as like rudders, all these little bitty tiny things, the color of their head and bill. So a lot of that reflects like their age. It might reflect their nutrition, how a female duck sizes up a male duck. I don't really know, but typically those that are in better condition, maybe older, we know older birds typically pair first, things like that. So yeah, kind of a long answer.
Yeah, that's really interesting. it really is. So goodness, this has been fascinating. Lenny,
no doubt about it. I'm just sitting here soaking it in.
Yeah. Lenny, have you got a question? Any questions? Or Mike, either one of y'all that we hadn't covered?
I was going to ask, me and Dudley have been discussing a lot the drying out and how it would affect, hoping to have a positive effect. So that's what I was going to talk about, but it sounds like it's pretty optimistic.
Definitely on the trees, moist soil, moist soil impoundments are different because you're dealing with a lot of annual plants.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not aware of any information that like, hey, if we keep flooding and drawing down this field on these dates the same way every year for like 50 years, what does it do to the seed bank of that plant?
Yeah, the same.
I don't know of any, I'm not aware of that information, not to say that we couldn't do it, but the trees are just different because they're so long lived, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're just so established. And what people don't realize about the woods too is that they're not, you look across the flooded woods, you think, oh, it's just this flat piece of ground with a bunch of trees. And actually, bottomwood hardwoods are not a lot different than like natural wetlands. There may not be as much topography in places, but we have things called like flats and ridges and swales, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even in those woods. And so historically, before we messed up hydrology, that's why the cherry barks, why they were some of the first trees to be cut, right? Because they're on the higher and drier. They're in a bottomland, but they're up on the more accessible sort of higher and drier ridges, right? Whereas like nuttall's and water oaks may be in a little bit lower elevation, but not nearly as low as cypress and gum trees, right? They're living in the water or near it. So even in the forest, you have a lot of this variability in topography, and that's what has created all these different tree species.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like herbaceous plants in a wetland, just a couple of inches of elevation, you might have annual smartweed, or you might have, red root flat sedge, whatever it might be. So the annual things are, you can kind of abuse them and play with them a lot more. Trees are typically more long-lived, obviously more long-lived, longer established. And it's not like we renew those every year. We're not disking the soil every year and like bringing things back to life. So water really, really matters, so too much too early, too much too late, that really matters,
Mm-hmm.
and we really have just started to realize in the last 20 years, the first green tree reservoir was basically Stuttgart in the 1930s. And then when everybody figured out, oh my God, look at these ducks going in these woods, and it's like, hey, we put levees around these things.
Yeah.
We got duck holes for days, and it nobody knew the science then. It's just taken a long time, so it's nobody's fault. It's just, but we do know enough now to be able to tell people, don't flood your woods, wait, flood the moist soil early, move water in your woods late. What a lot of growers deal with, though, is a lot of them want to get like the tailwater when it comes off the rice fields, because in a dry year like this, I had many landowners for years, man, if I don't get that tailwater, we may not have water. I'm like, I understand that, but, I might get fired. I'm not going to have water in the woods on opening day, and I understand all that. I mean, and it's even worse on public lands. How come my hole's not flooded,
Mm-hmm.
So in a year like this, it's really, really difficult because, one, the water is just not there. And it's a good year for the trees. Bad for us, great for the trees.
Yeah.
So.
Well, the mallard may be the most studied bird in the world.
It's literally probably the most well-known bird on the planet. Literally, yeah, yep.
Didn't realize.
And we can do a lot of stuff with them, analytically, because so many of them have been marked, and people like to shoot them, and you can band them, and we've marked a lot of them on the breeding grounds, through the decades. So there's a lot of information. We don't nearly know near as much about the hood or merganser, but people aren't throwing millions of dollars in. God loves the hood or merganser.
No doubt about it. Yeah. Sometimes he's the only one that shows up.
They're a fascinating duck, but they're not gonna. Yeah,
Lanny's bad about shooting one of those.
That's Neil.
I love them. They're neat birds. But, yeah.
So, Doc, did you bring a trivia question to try to stump us, or is that the one you threw out a moment
That's
ago?
a whole paper over there. He's gonna stump us.
I'm not gonna. Yeah.
So hang on before you go down the road. It seems like we used to ask our guests.
The
trivia
worm
questions,
has turned, to use Mr. Fox's term.
and nobody's been able to stump us. I'm not bragging.
Have we lost one yet?
No, we've gotten them all right.
Well, don't,
I'm not jinxing us.
Yeah,
but
I think you just did.
Richie, who is that kind of tee us up on this trivia thing?
I like that.
Today's trivia is brought to us by Sheffield Financial, because your finances are not trivial.
They are not trivial.
Okay, Richie.
We're trying to do what we can.
I think you might need to go back to the drawing board on that one.
I don't know. I kind of like it.
You don't like that, Bob?
Well, I don't
I
know.
like it.
We'll need to ask Sheffield what they think about it. They've got 14,000 offices, by the way. I'm just going to throw that out. If you need to finance something,
Whatever you need.
they're good.
They
at
do
it.
it for you.
ATV, UTVs, boats,
Tractors.
LS tractor.
LS tractors.
I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're
Getting your duck mounted. My gracious, have you a duck mount? They're expensive.
Oh,
That's
I
about $400 right
Yeah,
there.
I bet, yeah.
and no doubt about it.
Yeah.
So playing today for Nashville Bulldog, a prize, a pair of Duke dog-proof traps.
Oh, nice.
Mm-hmm.
I love those dogs.
Yeah,
I brought some back to the office, and somebody has helped themselves to them.
Oh, I think I know who that was.
Yeah, well, I need them. I got a bunch of raccoons right
Yeah.
now.
Well, a guy came by today and showed me a picture of 4 raccoons that he caught last night that works here.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh.
You know him. I'll introduce you. to him.
Probably where my dog proof.
Yeah.
So. All right, so okay,
Here we
Doc.
go.
Doc, now you can try to stump us.
So it's one of the interesting things about hunting regulations, and I think hunters sometimes get frustrated because the feds, for the last 20, 25 years now with adaptive harvest management, they're like, hey, you can shoot. We got plenty of ducks. You can shoot 6 a day for 60 days, right? And in the early 2000s, it got dry again. It was pretty dry. And there was a lot of mumbling coming off the 90s when hunting was really, really good, right? It was really wet in the 90s and it got dry. But instead of regulations going back down to like 3 or 4 ducks like they would have historically before the adaptive harvest management, they stayed at 6. So people were grumbling like, oh, you're telling us all these birds are out here, but yet we're not, shooting as many. And so you can legally shoot, a lot of people, lay people ask me this, like, how can you study these things and yet you want to go out and shoot 6 of them a day? Aren't you denting populations? I'm like, well, hunting really doesn't have a lot to do with it. And I'm like, matter of fact, do you know what the average harvest per man per day in general of ducks is? And I got that's one question, but I got to follow up to that one. But you guys probably know this.
I don't know. I think we might have talked about this at one point.
It's much lower than 6.
Yeah,
So these are just like the hip thing that I fill out every year and send back in.
And that's kind of a categorization of how many birds you shoot. All this kind of feeds into this.
So this is across the whole country, average harvest per hunter per day.
Yeah, I don't know if it fits all flyways. California, you can shoot 7 birds a day and for 90 days or whatever it is, 100 days. But generally, I'll give you a number. But what do you
think, Mike?
I'm gonna go with 2.
I'm going with 1.5.
How much we betting?
Okay, maybe half.
Yeah.
No. You're like red. You got smoke coming out of your ears. You're so hot, man.
Must be close. Well, I mean, I don't know. I really don't know. I would have thought it would have been a little higher than that.
No, you're right. It overall, it's like 1.2 or 1.4 something in there. It's hovering around one plus something. Yeah, and of course that can vary. That varies by.
So we're close enough that we can say we got it right.
Oh yeah!
All right.
Still undefeated. So if you asked me how many does Dudley
0
average, I would have said that 1.2. But the rest of us, I think we're like I'm always checking like.
No, I can tell you over the past few years, I'm definitely trending down.
He's still trying to kill his first one. Is that what you're saying?
Dudley's got a lot of challenges.
Okay.
Bless his heart.
So the other way to look at these things is, and when you look at the harvest regs, they give you all kind of stuff, like how many mallards were killed in every state and Canada, all that kind of stuff. Another statistic people like to know is what is the seasonal duck bag per hunter? So how many ducks do you shoot in a given year on average for the state of Mississippi? What do you think that is for the state of Mississippi?
So you're not asking what the bag limit is or what the possession limit is.
No, what's the average bag that you killed
throughout the year?
Yep. Give me a range, like per hunter per year in Mississippi.
In the
how
range,
many days? I mean, what kind of? I mean, we talking about a hardcore hunter?
No, just on average. It's average.
I'm gonna say 22 to 30.
Ooh. Oh man, that's high. Ooh. I think that's high. I'm on. Mac, you go next.
I'm gonna say greater than 15 and less than 20.
Man, that's right where I was gonna guess. I'm just gonna throw a number out there. I was gonna say 16.
Man, you guys are smart. You don't need me. Shoot, you need to come lecture in my class. So, from 1999 to 2000. The average was 21.3.
Oh.
And from 2016 to 2020, it was 15.1. So
is that...
You guys are close.
Could you take that data and say the average hunter hunts 16 days a season out of 60?
I don't know I don't know how many.
I can find average hunting days. I think in some data would be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it would be based on 60 days, but how that's divided up based on the number of days hunted, I can't remember if they did that or it's just based on the 60 days. So the other point I wanted to make is that it's not like a linear decline.
But it's definitely.
In the late 90s, it was as high as it was. And then in the early 2000s, the average is about 18. So from 2016 to 20, it's about 15. But in the early 2000s, when it got dry, it was around 15 to 17, somewhere in there. So it's not like we've had this linear decline. It's just getting worse. But the birds are showing up later. That might be one more point I want to make is that looking at Mississippi harvest or aerial surveys, for example, boy, there's this many ducks in November, there's this many in December, and in January, we're like this.
Mm-hmm.
January. So birds are coming later. So we're working on these survey data now. So a lot of people are like, oh, the ducks aren't here anymore. There's a massive decline. And so far, it's probably true. There's probably a bit of a decline for mallards, but some of the other ones like Shoveler and Gadwall, based on the aerial surveys, they've actually increased a little bit, believe it or not. What's going on, though, is that more birds are coming later.
Yeah.
So early in the year. And again, it kind of goes back to the weather events and things like that. So
yeah, makes sense.
You guys have some challenges to analyze those numbers because I would think in the last couple of years, the COVID brought a lot of people to hunting that may not have necessarily stayed, but they affected those numbers. And there's gosh, we talked at the beginning. There's so many young people kind of getting into it.
Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah, duck regulations are very complex because you got all kinds of things. Like you've got duck seasons now opening much earlier than they did historically. So you have like so many more days, so many more opening days than we did in the 60s and the 70s. Bag limits are different. Hunting period lengths are different. Split zones, open close seasons, it goes on and on and on, different limits. So the analytical part of waterfowl harvest can be really, really complex. It's
my takeaway though is that with all this stuff is that these regulations are put in place, but then every state's trying to maximize the number of hunter days for their hunters.
Oh yeah,
and so that's why they split it up.
And we've been doing, like Mike Brazier and I, a bunch of us. I don't want to name names because there's a lot of really smart people that a lot smarter than me, but we've been working on some of these things. And one of the startling statistics that's been revealed, and actually I think Dale Humberg in Missouri was the one that put all this data together. And I'm not going to try to recite the number of opening days that's increased, but it is just unbelievable the amount of like opening days, because now we have 60-day seasons and states are trying to like, we're going to open here and the next week this is going to be open. The number of opening weekends now is just like, I don't know if it's double. I can't remember the number. I'm ashamed to admit I can't remember the number, but it's extraordinary.
Yeah.
And the point of that is that there's constant disturbance from early in the fall to late winter now. Way back when I was a kid, we weren't hunting until the end of January, right? I mean, North Missouri was like an ice rink. Now a lot of years you can hunt North Missouri till the end of January. There may be some ice every now and then, but it's not like locked up, So through the years with the liberal regulations and just trying to create hunter opportunity, the number of opening weekends is just staggeringly higher than it was historically. And we're like, wow, no wonder ducks become nocturnal. I mean, from Minnesota to Louisiana, there's always an opening weekend somewhere,
right.
And ducks get shot and they're moving around and redistributing. So
they are very adaptable.
We put them on the wing, we put them on the move, but they are very adaptable. Yeah. But anyway, so
it's been really interesting.
Very interesting.
Need to get you back over here more often.
Yeah. Anytime. I love coming over. You guys are great.
You're right on down the road.
We need to do one of these.
You're not too
duck
honory.
blind.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
Yeah. You got some water? Are you water stressed?
I'm water stressed would be a good one.
Toxie's water stressed right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of people are.
I love that word.
We'll go do part 1 into duck blind and part 2 into Anthony's. And
there we go. That's what I'm talking about.
My last question for you, and these guys may have one more, but so Dr. Brian Davis, you're leaning up against an oak tree in a bottom. Ducks are funneling in. You're working them. You need one more duck to fill out your limit, and a hen mallard comes flying in.
Don't do this.
You gonna shoot her? Or you gonna not? What are you gonna do?
I've done it and I've not done it. It depends on how good it is. Depends. Well, I've made mistakes too, but yeah, normally, half the time I'll let her go. It just depends,
Yeah.
So that's a really good analogy though. Like, every hen that we don't shoot, that's one that's going to breed. And it's not true. And the great Todd Arnold, who's a really great statistics modeler in our field, people ask him that, like, every mallard hen that we pass up, is she going to make it back to the prairies and lay eggs? So every dead hen is one less clutch. And like, after all the math that he's done, he's like, well, that's like partially true. Probably half of those will and half of them won't to really make it really rough. So yeah, every time you shoot a mallard hen, it's not necessarily N-1 in terms of future reproduction, but late in the year, if they've made it that far, the difficulty is though, the mallard hens, those ducks that time of year, you've probably shot them. They're just so fat.
Fat.
They're so good. They've molted. They're starting to gain all that energy, man. Boy, I will feel guilty. So. So a lot of times I'll pass them by. If it's really lean and really thin, maybe I'll kill one.
I like this answer. It depends.
So it depends.
Yeah,
Normally I'll let them go. Yes. I pride myself on the green. Yeah.
Cool.
And if you get a chance to hunt flooded pecans, oh my God, some of the best hunts I've ever had in my life.
We need to build a levee around some pecan orchards.
When the
Never
rivers,
heard this.
Rivers getting, people are like, do ducks really eat acorns anymore? Some people, even biologists, are kind of skeptical. And the answer is yes, but they don't go to the woods just to eat acorns. That could be a whole nother podcast talking about all that. But pecans, like ducks eat pecans. I'm like, oh my God. If you've ever had the privilege of, a lot of times, you know, pecans are typically in more upland areas, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if they're in around rivers and you get a great flood, doesn't have to be great, but a flood, and it does reach into those. My last one, you could have done it in knee boots. You just kind of lean against the tree, and it's like, God, I don't want to shoot these things. There's just so many. It's like mosquitoes just.
Golly.
I'm like, man, I don't even want to shoot. You know, there's so many ducks. You know, and then you're like, all right, let's get them and get out of here. But yeah, they love pecans too. That's another one. So
Get them and get out of here.
Get 'em and get out.
That is
That's
sounds
good
like
advice.
you hunting with Toxie Hayes right there.
get them and get out. That's right.
All right, Doc. Well, we certainly enjoyed this.
Well, I appreciate you guys asking me to come over. So,
Oh yeah, we appreciate you being here.
So, listeners, if there's some young people that are interested in maybe taking some courses from you at Mississippi State, can they follow you on social media? Do you do any of that?
It's funny. So yeah, I'm one of those old guard. You know, I don't do a lot of social media, but I hear a lot of things about what people are doing. You know, I always kind of threaten them with that. Like, I know what you're up to, but anyway, I don't do a lot of that. But I will say we are about to actually hire a graphics artist type person that's going to do all kind of things, like help us maybe with some logos, definitely the social media stuff,
graphics and stuff.
like basically talking about, hey, this is what we do. So we have a really cool website. I'm embarrassed to say I need to update it right now, but we do have, if you go to Mississippi State University, you can read all about us. Type in like Kennedy, like, you know, James C. Kennedy Waterfowl program, and it'll go right to the site and you can see all of our stuff. So all that said, we are about to be thrust upwards in that world. We're going to have a person that's going to help, like me and Dr. McConnell, the upland game bird, as you guys know, Mark, and a lot of the other professors, but we're just going to try to get the word out even more. So I've got 9 active grad projects right now, and just trying to keep up with the stuff I really need to do is just, it's great. I love it, but it can be tiring. So I need some help. We need help with some of the extracurriculars, if you will. So we're going to do that. We're about to ramp up on that.
Yeah. You know, I've been around some students in the last year or two and heard a lot of them say you're the coolest professor over there.
Oh,
Hey, all
probably
right.
because I cook for them. I cooked gumbo for them twice this year, and I think I had shrimp pasta one day, and yeah.
Man,
Anyway,
I'm gonna take some classes.
cook specs at the tailgate, so they come eat that, and like, Doc, this isn't steak, you know. And I'm like, no, it's white front. You know, oh wow. So
How about that?
That's awesome.
All right, Mac, you got anything to add? You got thumbs up? We need to. It's been a long day. We've had the company Christmas party today.
Christmas party.
I'm proud you guys are
That's right.
awake. That's
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
Yeah.
No snoring.
Dudley snuck out of here. He had to go to a Pilates.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Something,
Some
so.
Pilates class. He's into that now.
And Laney got an award today.
I want an award.
Mm-hmm.
A major award.
It wasn't a major award at all.
Participation.
Participation
Yes, it
award.
is a
That's exactly
participation.
what it was. I've been participating for a while.
30 years.
Pretty crazy.
How
That's
about
great.
that?
Yeah, been here
It
30.
flies by.
It flies by. Been here 30 years.
I'll be talking to my kids in class. I'm like, hey, you remember so-and-so? And they're like, no, Doc. I'm like, yeah, that was like 6 or 7 years ago.
Yeah.
You guys were like 10, right? And
It
anyway,
happens
it
fast.
flies quick.
It
Yeah.
does.
Yeah, it
So-
does. Well, thank you for coming. We
Thank you.
appreciate everybody listening.
Absolutely.
And, man, y'all, if you can, subscribe or follow us or whatever, so you'll get these podcasts. They'll come right to you. We appreciate you doing that. And
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
yeah, guys. So I'm gonna look at Lanny. Why don't you say goodbye, Lanny?
Goodbye, Dudley.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Gamekeeper Podcast. And be sure to tune in again. Subscribe to Gamekeeper Farming for Wildlife magazine, and don't miss the Mossy Oak Properties Fistful of Dirt podcast with my good buddy, Ronnie Cuz Strickland.